All right, good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, giving up an hour of your Saturday morning. I am the president of nabj-south Florida, Russell Motley, and this is a very important topic for us this morning. 2020's biggest story, COVID-19. It has impacted everyone, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a professor, whether you're a mental health care professional. And I felt it very necessary for us to meet together so we can have these discussions. And ultimately, at the end of this session, hopefully we'll have a lot of answers and hopefully we'll have some healing. So first of all, I want to welcome my board members of nabj South Florida. I want to thank you all for supporting me on this effort. I also want to acknowledge the other chapters in this area, including NABJ FMU at Florida Memorial University, as well as NABJ UM at the University of Miami. Also want to take this time to acknowledge a very distinguished person that is joining us this morning. I'm so happy that she's with us. NABJ President Dorothy Tucker. If you could give us a few words, and let me preface this by saying, earlier this week, Dorothy sent us a message, NABJ a message, letting us know that she had tested positive for COVID-19, the virus. And fortunately, so fortunately, she has recovered and she's doing well, and she's back on track. So Dorothy, if you can share with us a few words about your experience, and we'd love to hear what you have to say.
It was, it's been a challenging time. I don't know that it's kind of the combination of everything, you know, being a working journalist and trying to work remotely and continue to do the job at the same time, not knowing at the time what was quite wrong with me. I was fatigued, but beyond that, I didn't really have a fever. I was just tired, and so I rested. And then, you know, I found out later that I was indeed positive. I suspected that I was positive because I had heard from a couple of people who were positive and who were around me that they had been positive. So I suspected that, which is why I got tested. But just trying to, you know, just kind of continue to work and continue to do the work of NABJ, I think really kind of kept me going. You know, I was too busy to lay down. I was too busy to stop. There was too much to do. And when I look back on it, I think that was probably the best thing that could have happened, was that I didn't stay in bed, because I've heard from people who have stayed in bed that the virus can then just kind of get into your lungs. And I got up every morning because I had so much to do, and I just kept going, and that is part of my personality. But that's me. You know, I'm grateful for all of the well wishes. I'm grateful for the prayers. I have been touched by just the, you know, outpouring of prayers and support from our members. So I appreciate that. But, you know, I'd like to speak to, you know, the pressing issue that this pandemic is hitting Black journalists in particular hard. You know, I've heard from so many of our members who have been furloughed, are taking job cuts, have been laid off. We're in the middle of getting a promotion that got stalled, or are in contract negotiations that have stopped. It's very, very difficult. So, you know, we at NABJ are trying to address the issue in a number of different ways. One of the things, and I hope you, and please make sure you tell our members that if there is anything that they need, to let us know. I'm putting out some surveys and just kind of trying to get some feedback. But in terms of your membership, we are going to extend, if you've been laid off, we are extending the membership for 6 months. If you've been laid off for a load or whatever, and your membership dues are about to come up, you know, we're going to again give you a 6-month extension, because we want to make sure that our members stay connected. literally last week we had earlier this week rather, we had a meeting about a relief fund that we are going to put together. We already have some money in pocket that we're transferring from another fund to that fund. And we are going to, take applications and help those people who are, who financially need a little tiding over. And our career fair, we've had a number of webinars, and I hope you've had an opportunity to participate, because we have had a couple of webinars almost every week looking at how to deal with this, stories to cover, what to do if you get a paycheck. Here's some people who are offering jobs, and we keep pushing our career center because there are jobs on that site, and we want our members to know that is a place that they can go to. At the same time, there is another committee on the board that is working on what we're going to probably call something like, COVID-19 jobs for today, because we want to make sure that if managers are looking right now, we want them to tell us, we want to get that information out to you. So, that's where we are right now, because we know that those are the greatest needs. I talk about the convention if you want, but because I know that is a pressing question. Would you like me to deal with the question?
Sure, if you could give us a very quick update about the convention.
I know you have had an opportunity, I hope you have anyway, to read the updates. I've tried to put an update out, at least once a week as things have gone along, to keep everybody, informed. Because you are recording this, I am going to limit some things that I say, because we are in the middle of negotiations with the hotel, trying to figure out what our convention is going to look like. And it's like anything, when you're in the middle of negotiations, you have to be very careful with the wording that you use. But I can tell you that we're not living in a vacuum. We know our members are concerned about coming to the convention, but we're hoping for a miracle. We're looking for a miracle. And probably the best thing to say is that, we're going down two roads. We're planning for a virtual. We're pouring a lot of energy into a virtual convention. But if there is a miracle that happens, we have to be prepared for an in-person convention as well. So we have to go down both of those roads. Again, as we continue to negotiate with the hotels, realizing that a social gathering is going to be not impossible. So, at some point, I'll be very honest with you, at some point, if you guys would like me to come back and have more of an off the record conversation with you, then I am more than willing to do that, where I can probably answer a few more questions. But since we are in this arena today, let's talk more about the details at another time.
And I think that would be appropriate if you were able to come back and give us an update. But thank you so much, Dorothy Tucker, for those words. I know you're working tirelessly, and please stay healthy and get some rest if and when you can. Right now, I want to move forward, and I want to introduce you to our moderator for today. She's a familiar face to South Florida. She's been away from us for several years now. Her name is Rochelle Oliver, and she left us, I don't know, probably about a decade ago, and she went to New York. But now she's back, and so she reached out to me a couple weeks ago, and I said, I immediately have to get you back into the fold here at NABJ South Florida. And she did not hesitate to step up to the plate. So Rochelle Oliver is editor-in-chief of Island and Spice magazine. You can find that at islandandspice.com. It is a quarterly magazine that explores the culinary scene of the Caribbean diaspora. And without further ado, Rochelle, can you continue with our program?
All right, thank you so much, Russell. It really is a pleasure to be back. A little shout out for everyone, because I know things are hard. We are hiring, and so feel free to check out the website and see what jobs are available. I know for writers and copy editors, it's been really difficult, so we're doing what we can to help everyone out. Also, Dorothy, thank you for coming on today. She said something that I think was really important about staying connected. And I want to talk a lot about the idea of staying connected we have Consuelo Davis on the panel today, and she is the, I want to get it right, the mental health counselor, interim director for Florida Memorial University, and she's also the host of Talk Therapy Show podcast, and is a member of the Association of Black Psychologists. Staying connected right now as journalists is so important. So I think it's great what NABJ is doing to help people just stay just a part of a community, which is really important right now. So thank you, Dorothy, for letting us know about that. Before we go on to the rest of the panelists, I do want to let everyone know when you enter the room, the mics were muted. Please keep those mics muted. It just helps us manage the flow of the conversation, and we can give all of our attention to our panelists who are going to be answering wonderful questions today. Some of those questions are going to be coming from you out there in the audience. You can raise your hand, although there's a lot of people in this room, so it might be better for you to drop your question into the chat box, which should be on either the left or right of your screen. And so drop your questions in there. We'll try to get to them. During the panel, we'll try to get to them, but we'll also open it up for Q&A toward the end to get as many of your questions answered. So other than that, Russell, we also wanted to, I know, acknowledge the many journalists we've lost to coronavirus. I know some of the publications, like the New York Times, we've lost. Some of my former colleagues are no longer with us, and that's my story. It's not unique. A lot of our journalists, they're on the front lines, which is why we're talking about this story. So we want to take a moment to right now to honor those journalists and not lose that opportunity.
Yes, please. Let's take a few moments of silence to honor those journalists that we've lost.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Russell, thank you for that. Let's go ahead and jump into our panel discussion. We have Jacqueline Charles, the Caribbean correspondent for the Miami Herald, Terrell Forney, general assignment reporter with the Local 10 News here in South Florida, which carries on WPLJ, Cece Wahisi, who is the faculty advisor for University of Miami, where she oversees the campus's weekly newspaper, the Miami Hurricanes. Some of you guys are probably throwing up the U. And I already mentioned, yeah, we gotta throw up the U. Also, we already mentioned Consuelo Davis with Florida Memorial University. So I wanna just go ahead and get started. The first questions are gonna go to Jacqueline and Terrell. We have to start with safety. I'm curious, journalists are out there. You guys are interviewing people, covering the news. So first I want to go to Terrell. Go ahead and unmute you. How have you been keeping yourself safe while reporting on the front lines of COVID-19?
Thank you for that. Covering this pandemic, it really has changed our workflow in this business. So we don't have as many face-to-face interviews. We do a lot of interviews on FaceTime and Skype, and that is something traditionally that we normally didn't do before because we are such a visual medium. But when we do encounter those face-to-face videos, everyone can't be avoided. We try to distance ourselves to 6 feet, and we attach a microphone onto some sort of an extension pole or a light pole, something like that, where you're able to at least grasp the audio and still maintain your distance. Our company, we have, fortunately, they have supplied us with face masks. So we have a few N95 face masks, and I have a surgical mask in which they've all supplied. But the supply is limited. I mean, you have those 2 or 3 masks to last you indefinitely unless you can acquire something on your own. So trying to be responsible in using those and trying to remind other people who may not be as mindful when you encounter them in the field about maintaining that distance. So there's a lot that goes into it, but we try to minimize our person-to-person contact is number one.
I want to share a video you did with the audience. This was earlier on when the crisis was really starting to hit Florida. And you were actually interviewing the first person to die of coronavirus here in Broward. And so I want to share that because that sort of coverage ended very quickly. You know, the environment has changed so much since that time that you wouldn't even probably be allowed to do this story now. So I want to share that, and then I want you to talk about it a little bit after. Let me go ahead, bear with me while I tee this video up. Is advance up. Let me go ahead and ask, I'm not sure if I have the host. Probably am, 1 second. You know, it worked earlier. Here we go. Great. Everyone can see that?
Yes.
Great.
That 77-year-old coronavirus victim is heartbroken tonight, as you can imagine.
Local 10 News reporter Terrell Forney spoke with them exclusively. He joins us live from Southwest Miami-Dade. Terrell.
Well, that family is speaking out tonight because they wanted to help put a face to this virus. They say that, yes, he had health complications, but they considered him to be low risk because he didn't travel overseas. In fact, he rarely even left that assisted living facility.
Richard was ebullient. He was loving. He was, what do you say in a moment like that? He was perfect.
Richard and Sheila Curran were married for 56 years. The two lived together in the Atria Willowwood Assisted Living Facility in Fort Lauderdale until Richard suddenly fell ill late last week.
I think the family's in shock because he always pulled through. Yeah.
The call came in at 5 this morning to the family that their beloved patriarch was dead from bacterial pneumonia after testing positive for COVID-19. Richard was being treated at Holy Cross Hospital.
There's 3 high-risk groups as categorized by the CDC, and those are diabetics, people with heart disease, and people with lung disease. He had all 3 of those.
Richard was Sheila's caretaker. She suffers from a neurodegenerative disorder and is now on home quarantine with her daughter.
Afraid for her and us. Thankfully, it's been several days and she's not symptomatic yet, right? So, so we're hopeful. We're hopeful, but again, like, this is community spread. You know, he did not go to China. he didn't leave his facility.
No
I'm not
symptoms.
going to get sick.
So that family monitoring things very closely within their own household, but Richard is being remembered as a retired magician. As far as why they're speaking out again, they say they want the community to be aware, and they also want people to take this virus seriously. They say that everyone should obviously slow the spread of this virus and obviously practice those self-distancing, those safe distancing rules. Even during our interview, we maintained that 6 feet perimeter with our contact. Reporting live from Southwest Miami-Dade, I'm Terrell Forney. Local 10 News.
So that video was early March, and it was the last door knock that I did. In this business, especially being in television, as a television journalist, we are so responsive. When we get an address, we just go without thinking twice to get the story. And the impact, now again, at that point, we hadn't had any confirmed cases in there. So Richard was the first one in Broward County to be confirmed to have died from COVID. He lived at that assisted living facility with his wife. So when we knocked on the door, which was in a different county, we weren't anticipating on seeing the wife in a different county at the family home, but yet we rang the doorbell and the daughter opened the door, and then she later revealed that her mom was there. And then it's like, you know, you're not you're not supposed to be that close to people who obviously are in quarantine. So there were a set of circumstances that we didn't realize until we were in it. The wife later tested positive for COVID, so it was a good thing that she was at least in quarantine. I've been in constant contact with the family. We talked just a few days ago. She's doing well. She has recovered from it. But that just shows you why it is such a struggle, and also why it's so dangerous out there, at least for journalists who are on the front lines covering their stories, because you really don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And you really have to be responsible. And even our employer early on, WPLG, they sent out a reminder when this thing started to hit. Now, this was before all those measures to stay at home went into effect, just to, in a sense, just use your common sense. This message went out to everyone, because we really don't know the toll that it's going to take. So that came out from management. Use your common sense when you're out there. No soundbite is worth the risk. And if you feel like you're putting yourself in jeopardy, then it's okay. We support you if you don't get the story.
I want to, when you talk about risk, and now we're in an environment, I saw you in that video and I'm saying, oh my gosh, no mask, no gloves. It's kind of the thing now. When you see somebody, you're just like, protect yourself and protect others. I can wear a mask, someone else can wear a mask, but if you wear a mask, sometimes the situation's different. You're a Black man in Florida. Black men in America, talk about being a Black man in Florida. It's a different ballgame. And so, do you have concerns? Yes, your company's telling you to be safe, take the right precautions, but the precautions aren't necessarily equal. And the risks aren't equal either. You're much more at risk as a Black man for many things. I don't need to go down the list, but let's just, speaking about wearing a mask and protecting yourself and doing your job, how has that impacted your day-to-day?
I am a Black man before I'm a Black journalist. So the realities of the perceptions that that can be made out in public are constantly at the back of your mind. So for me, it's important to, have the right kind of mask. I think that I grew up in the inner city in Cleveland, Ohio. So I am very aware of, how people may feel if you walk in with a bandana, over your head, or, anything like that. So for me, the right kind of mask is always just kind of what's important. When we go to grocery stores down here, people, if you have on any type of covering, people are not able to associate you perhaps from TV like they would if you didn't have on a mask. So you just blend in a sense. So I think having a mask has changed our day to day in the sense that we are encountering more and more public areas, public spaces where we are required to have that. And fortunately, I haven't been personally put in a position where I've just had to use something where, people can make their assumptions who may be unfamiliar, with just what you have on, the certain type of cloth covering. So I think just in general, people, especially Black people, should be mindful of just the type of covering that they use.
Okay, I want to shift over to Jacqueline, and if you can talk to me about how you're keeping yourself safe. You're often on planes, and to do your job, you're usually in the Caribbean, embedded in the communities. I know a lot's changed for you as well. So how are you keeping yourself safe?
Well, one of the things that happened very early on in this is that at the Miami Herald for McClatchy, we got a directive very early, no travel. And I remember on that particular day, I was on my way to Montreal, Canada, for an assignment and also for an event for the Pulitzer Center on crisis reporting. and my flight didn't leave until 7 o'clock. And so really early on, you know, the company was like, it's about keeping yourself safe, and very similar to what WPLG has done in respect to the reporters providing masks and, you know, other equipment, sanitizers. We've also done that here at the Miami Herald. Reporters have been told that, you know, no story is worth your life. For the time being, I'm in a situation where I am doing a lot of telephone reporting, using my sourcing, using my network, but I know that that moment is going to come, and I hope it doesn't, where a decision will have to be made in terms of getting on a plane to go to the story, because there is only so much you can do from afar. I mean, I cover a region that is being hard hit right now, Latin America and the Caribbean. We're seeing the numbers going up. We have not hit the surge yet. We're dealing with countries with very weak healthcare systems. Every week we are reminded of this. And so I'm just of the mindset right now, we will cross that bridge when we get to it. But I look at my fellow journalists in countries like Haiti, where they haven't completely made the switch over to Zoom or to virtual reporting. And you see these journalists in rooms, some of them have masks, some of them don't. And it's a balance, because, you know, the big thing about this pandemic is you don't know who necessarily has it or who doesn't have it. And so every time you step out, you put yourself in this, you know, in this danger. So for now, for me, I'm working from home. I happen to be at the office today, but I am working, you know, from home. And a lot of my colleagues, all of us actually, have been working from home now for several weeks, and we are using masks. We are written as a company. We've gone in with other media houses, and we've written letters to the governor, to other people, and saying, listen, can we do pool reporting? Can we, you know, do virtual reporting? Can we limit the need for all of these journalists to gather at these press conferences and put themselves at risk on the front line for a press conference? There are other ways that we can do this.
Yeah. You know, journalists are used to putting themselves in the situations where everyone else is running away, we're running in, right? And, you know, you've been, you've been covering the Caribbean since 1994. No one knows the Caribbean more than you. Then, given that you've been dedicated to this region for so long, that means that you were there covering the hurricanes, the disasters that followed the hurricanes. You were there covering cholera, Zika, Zika. Really, you are the authority when it comes to covering the Caribbean, and so much the ups and downs that has happened over the last decades. How does your experience come into play when covering disasters? How does it come into play with how does it come into play with the disaster we're covering right now?
I have to tell you, this disaster is like no other. You know, when cholera struck Haiti, there was a thing that I used to do was every time I went with a pair of shoes, I always left it. I never brought it back with me. You know, you're constantly washing your hands. You're constantly having to remind yourself not to touch your face. The day that cholera actually broke in Haiti, that we got confirmation, I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing, what I ate that day. And I remember the first phone call I made because I was really, you know, freaked out. The difference with this is, again, that unknown and the impact. You know, I was there with Zika. I have to tell you, I got Zika. I got it the day that the elections were canceled and they were supposed to happen. And I was not trying to leave. I wanted to stay with the story. I was there with the earthquake. With this pandemic, it is like a fast-moving bullet train. The minute you hit publish on a story, something's changed. A number has changed. You have to, knowing sources and people to call, and knowing the fact that you're not going to be getting all of the information. Some countries are better than others with actually giving you numbers in terms of the number of people who've been confirmed or what they're doing, or places that may be on quarantine. So having, you know, access to either former ministers of health or the current Minister of Health, people who are on the front lines at the hospitals, who can take you behind the debate in terms of rapid testing, or answer why is there not aggressive testing, or why there is aggressive testing. I mean, these are the things that help you. I think that for journalists who are covering this, you're really drawing on your experience as a journalist, as a reporter, because you don't have the luxury sometimes of being face to face with somebody and sort of looking at them and trying to figure out, are they they snowballing you? Are they being completely honest? So a lot of it is digging for information, looking for other information, such as the WHO, other aid agencies, and again, knowing different people that you can call so that you can give readers as much of a complete story as you can.
Yeah. And to that point, being able to look someone in the eye and see if they're telling you the truth is so important. And obviously that layer is removed. So again, that emphasizes the importance of your experience, right? And being able to know that. But this also speaks to a lot of the misinformation that's going around, speaks, I think, somewhat to a level of distrust that's taking place. We have distrust in the media. There's a lot of distrust of the media. There's distrust of the presidency. You know, some outlets have even stopped airing the press conferences, the presidential press conferences. And a little bit about, are the reports that countries reporting about the infection rates, about deaths, are they accurate? And so I'm curious, because I'm seeing that a lot of the information that's being released is also being released right before deadlines and right before airtime, before prime time. And I'm curious to see, how do you go about finding facts and sources you can trust during the time where distrust is at an all-time high? And Terrell, you can also answer this after Jackie speaks to it.
This is an evolving story. I mean, I'll give you an example, a recent example. A week ago Sunday, I'm watching the news conference live out of Barbados, and the Minister of Health is talking about the fact that the United States had confiscated 20 ventilators that were purchased by a philanthropist. So it's live, it's being broadcast all across the Caribbean and at this point the world. So I started working on a story. I reached out to the State Department, which basically is saying that they're tired of people just trying to, you know, create friction within these countries, basically denying that this was a situation. I tracked down a phone number for this minister. I'm trying to call him, trying to talk to him. He says he's going to reach out. We held the story until 6 a.m. the next morning because I wanted to give him an opportunity to shed more light on this. He did not respond. The story goes out at 6. Then the next day actually a few hours later, I get an email saying, oh, the minister walked back his allegation because one of the local media houses down there actually did manage to get a hold of him. Well, he didn't really sort of, you know, walk it back. But interesting enough, 3 days later on Twitter, and I have to tell you, Twitter has become a very good friend these days. You have to watch what's out there, but a lot of the leaders in the region are using Twitter. And the premier of the Cayman Islands sent a tweet out where he basically confirmed that the U.S. had blocked medical supplies to that country in the midst of this pandemic. One, as a journalist, I definitely felt vindicated, but I said, you know what, I need to jump on the story because now it was not just Barbados, but the Cayman Islands. And then I have a good source who happens to be my cousin who's a lawyer in the Bahamas with a first-hand scoop on the fact that this had also happened in the Bahamas. And he had confirmed this because he had a conversation with the minister there. So we were able to come back a couple of days later and write a story. And by the way, we presented this question during President Trump's briefing. He starts talking about drug interdictions and maybe this is the reason why these things were blocked. I mean, I felt that he didn't really understand the question, but I was like, you know what? I'm not just going to go with President Trump's reply. I reached out to the NSC, to the White House, and says, listen, we have this question. Here's the issue. We also reached out to Border Patrol. And after days of having the US government deny that this was happening, they went on the record and confirmed, yes, indeed, they had a right under this new accord that President Trump had signed to decide whether or not masks, ventilators, other PPEs can leave the United States or not. So it's not just tenacity, but it's digging and not taking no for an answer and not being intimidated because some government is telling you that's not the case.
Yeah. And this is interesting. And you started sharing it, but I think it's worth mentioning at this moment that while all journalists are dealing with this churn of news, this breaking news, in fear of their life in many ways, like with Terrell having to go out there and put himself in very risky situations, journalists are also being scrutinized by the White House and the president himself.
Yes.
So, you're also having to deal with that. And, we've seen it happen with Yamiche Alcindor, to asking very relevant questions that people do need to know, and they have the right to know. And they're not getting their answers. My question here is, what is the ultimate cost and long-term repercussions of berating journalists who are simply doing their job? And in the case with his ventilators, of everyone kind of going crazy on Twitter and saying, oh, this isn't necessarily right, and really kind of putting journalists into a corner. Do you think there's a long-term cost or repercussion of what's happening right now?
I mean, we saw it even before this pandemic, and we're seeing it going on. I mean, it's this whole distrust in the public that we have of journalists, and this whole idea in terms of fake news. And I have to tell you, President Trump, doesn't have a monopoly on berating journalists. It happens, in the region that I cover. It's happened to me. It's happened to other colleagues of mine. But you have to remain confident, and we are here to do a job. And the public has a right to know, and they demand to know. So for everybody who may be dismissing you as fake news, you have to get to the facts, and you have to let the facts speak for themselves. And this is also why we also have to make sure that we dot every I, we cross every T. Yes, we're going to get some things wrong. We're going to make mistakes, and we have to say that we did it, but you have to continue to just dig and get to the bottom of the facts, and tell, your audience what you don't know. Here's what we know, and here's what we do not know. And you will be surprised how far that goes, because what we are seeing, at least here at the Miami Herald, is that people want to know. People are clicking on these stories. They're reading these stories. They're hungry for these stories. They want to know what comes next. They are following the narrative. And that's always the challenge of how do you push that story forward just a little bit from the last story that you told. And just, again, this is such a fast moving, issue that there's so much we know. There's a lot more that we don't know than what we know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, when you cover a hurricane, the hurricane hits, and you and I had talked about this, and there's a natural curve of events. It begins the disaster hits, and then the world gets back together. Everything comes back together. And earlier on in Terrell's video that we showed, the woman said, "We're hopeful." We're still trying to be hopeful right now, but it's hard to do that when the breaking news is really nonstop, and a lot of for journalists, it's hard to catch a breath. I want to turn now, speaking to like the anxiety and the stress of journalism. I want to switch to Consuelo. Okay, let me go ahead and spotlight Consuelo here and make sure. Consuelo, can you speak? Let me make sure you're not muted.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, great. When talking about the coronavirus, the conversation is often focused on physical health, about physical safety, wearing your mask, wearing your gloves, wash your hands. But there's also a hidden mental toll that we aren't really talking about right now. And when it comes to covering breaking news, global pandemic, nonstop for days, for weeks, for months, some journalists are going to be covering it for years. And this is the story of our lifetime, really. What risks should journalists be aware of when it comes to their mental health?
One, self-care. You have to sometimes shut it down and just take care of yourself. And that may be requiring that you shut it down, but you just cut off connections with people around you, with your peers for a while, and just do something that makes you happy, that you can engage in, that can give you some pleasure and not continue to increase your anxiety. Now, even when you're out in the field, there are things that you can do in the moment, in the here and now, that can decrease your anxiety if you're feeling overwhelmed, or if you're going at a pace, continuously attempting to cover the story. You can take a moment. You can take 2 minutes out and take some deep breaths. Very simple things that you can do. And when you take these deep breaths, I mean, like you've witnessed a baby breathing and you see how their stomach goes up and down. Well, we take deep breaths deep down in our diaphragm. So when you take that deep breath deep down in your diaphragm and you hold it for 5 seconds and release, you will feel the tension release out of your body. So little things like that, grounding techniques. If you're outside and you're going to be outside running around covering a story, you can sometimes just take your shoes off, plant your feet on the ground, sit under a tree, and just have a moment to yourself.
So you talked about grounding techniques, the breathing, and letting your feet touch the ground. These are very simple exercises. They also sound maybe like oversimplistic, and I don't mean to be rude by saying that, but people breathe every day and they still got anxiety. So there must be some sort of science behind this. You said, so I mean, what is it about breathing? You said hold it for 5 seconds. Can you explain a little bit more? When I'm out there covering news, or when I remember covering like a bomb at Port Authority, I wasn't thinking about breathing at that time. Is that just a new way we need to? I wasn't thinking about, okay, I need to stop or take off my shoes and just, you're just going. It's what you're built for, I don't know if we're built for years worth of breaking news coverage though. So how do we shift gears mentally to say, oh, I gotta breathe? Like it's simple, but it's also really difficult because it's a behavior change.
Exactly. But if you are covering stories consistently and you get to a space, you have to process it, right? And that sometimes when we don't do that, or when we attempt to process it, it can go into trauma. But when you're taking moments, even if it's processing, you have to sit down somewhere at some point in time to say, this is happening, right? If you don't take some breaths, that's where your stress continues to go up and up. And then in that, when you're taking these deep breaths, it's oxygen. You're replenishing your cells when you take in these deep breaths of oxygen. And that in itself is self-healing. Your blood flow, it changes your blood flow, right? We don't look at these little things, but our breath is really a blessing, and we don't understand the depth of the breath and how it impacts our body.
I love that you said that a breath is a blessing and we don't understand how it impacts the body in this time where we can feel like so much is out of our control. The one thing we can control is our breath.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And what I attempt to press upon people is that throughout the day, if you start doing these things, implementing these little habits, they become natural. And you automatically do it. It'll automatically be something that you go to and you know that this is going to help me in this moment of time. But you kind of have to train yourself and be conscious of it in the beginning. But once you start and do it, I say, do it for 30 days. You get up in the morning, just take your deep breath. Start in a relaxing moment. If you're driving in the car, you can still take your deep breaths. If you're feeling overwhelmed in a moment with someone or going into a space where you like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen and I'm out here interviewing these people, take your deep breaths throughout the day and say, and give yourself a mantra. I'm going to be okay. I can do this. I'm protected. Things like that really help. Gratitude is huge. We have to look at what we have and be blessed with, or in the, what we have instead of what we lack. And then also the fear. We give into fear, which is something that is happening now with everyone throughout America.
Yeah.
Fear is huge. Fear increases our anxiety. So when I say step back for a moment and take care of yourself, even if you have to shut down everything and just be in isolation to yourself, not because you're depressed, but because you know, I have to center myself. I have to get grounded. This is happening. How do I process this?
Yeah. There's the element of, you know, I love what you're saying, because I'm a Super Soul Sunday girl. I'm an Oprah fan, a Iyanla fan, so I'm loving that. But then there's also some very scary things happening in the industry right now. The New York Times has been updating their numbers, but their most recent numbers I've seen is that there's 33,000 job cuts or furloughs, price reductions, just impacting the media industry alone. So, you know, there's when you're working in the companies, sometimes the idea is, I mean, companies are supposed to be able to help you. Oh, go to your boss, let them know that you're dealing with some stuff. You need a little bit of a break. You need a breather. You might need some help. You have a human resources department you're supposed to be able to go to as well. But during a time when things are so fragile, I think a lot of journalists can actually feel a lot of fear, real fear. I mean, when it comes to talking honestly about their boss and their needs, are there resources? Can you mention some resources our journalists could go to outside of their job if they do need help? And I'm going to go ahead, as you mentioned them, I'm going to try to drop them into the chat room. Let's see how well I can multitask.
Sure. Some of the resources out there right now, like I work with the Association of Black Psychologists as well as the interim director at Florida Memorial University. So the Association of Black Psychologists, we attempt to get, or we're attempting to be more vocal out in our communities and present so that you know that we're here to support you during these times. But there is Psychology Today is another resource that if you are in a different area, you're not in South Florida, you can go out on Psychology Today. There's a listing of many psychologists and psychiatrists. And then they also have groups. There are organizations that, because now virtually it's a little difficult considering and how to get everything set up and get people screened for some of these groups. But there are some groups that, organizations that are holding groups. So another organization that I can refer you to is, there's here in South Florida, there's the Children's Services Commission. Although they deal with mostly children, they're also expanding their services for families. So that's another place you can go to, and they also have programs for groups for parents and children to attend.
Okay, one second. I'm going to try to get this off the screen here. There we go.
Today as well, the Association of Black Psychologists, our Houston chapter is hosting a panel where we are engaging the community to talk about COVID and what it looks like, even with your children having to having to isolate in home and quarantine, you know, dealing with them adjusting to everything as well. So it's a panel of over 10 psychologists, and it starts this afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m.
So, you know, is it possible, this is just something, I'm going to go ahead, and a link that you sent me earlier was about PTSD. Journalists right now, I know a lot of former colleagues at the New York Times, they are on the obits beat covering thousands of people, victims, doing obituaries for, you know, the everyday man, really. When you're really in that for hours every day, nonstop, is there the risk of getting PTSD? Can you get PTSD from being a journalist?
Yes. You are going into...
Yes, I know the answer, but I'm gonna let her answer.
These experiences, it's traumatic, right? We all process in a different way. We all process trauma in a different way. Some individuals could be triggered because they've had trauma in the past that, you know, they never knew that they had. And that's a big thing. We have intergenerational trauma, we have historical trauma, and then just with some experiences of living in certain communities, even campuses, there are certain things that are happening on campus, like sexual assault. So there are people, even though you may be a journalist, there could be things that have happened in your past that you may not have dealt with, and then you're triggered with this situation, or this situation just covering COVID can be traumatic because you're seeing so much death. And death in itself can be just to grieve, right, and process it. When we think about when we lose someone very dear to us, and it's not something we planned for, or it just happens, right, and accidental. The impact of that. So you're out here covering these cases or covering these stories, and you're seeing all of this, and you've never ever had to deal with this before. Yeah. How do you process?
Yeah, yeah. I know we're getting close to the marker, and I definitely want to open it up for questions. So, but before we do that, I want to go to Cece and give her an opportunity, because her class early on, before coronavirus, really arrived to the US and became a national concern. Her students were covering the coronavirus happening in a very interesting way. It was about covering what was the experience Chinese students were dealing with, are going through while their family was abroad suffering and from COVID-19. So I want to go ahead and have Cece speak at this moment about the package. And while you do that, Cece, I'm going to go ahead and try to do a share screen and show the package that you sent us.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm learning a lot from everybody's presentation, and I'm so grateful to South Florida NABJ for sponsoring this, because it's very, very helpful to all of us. So I just wanted to say that to start with. The package that our students did in my reporting class was to go out and interview Chinese students who are attending the University of Miami, because their families, their friends were going through what we are going through right now in this country. A lot of my students were reluctant to do that. They didn't want to talk to the Chinese students. There was some innate fear among some of them, because they thought that they were thinking that some of the students might be contagious and that sort of thing. So it was a learning experience. The students did go ahead and they interviewed several students. It turned out to be a dynamic package. And what you see here is that we interviewed students from throughout, whose families were throughout China, including in Wuhan. Actually, the lead writer here is Esther Anamalu, who is one of our members of the South Florida Black Journalists Association. And she's also an active member on our chapter at the University of Miami. And so you can see here that we interviewed family members in Wuhan, and they shared photos and told us what was going on there. Briefly, I can tell you that one of the students we interviewed just went home 2 days ago, because her parents were so afraid of her still being in the United States, so that they thought they needed to bring her home. So she's one of my current students, and now she's just returned to China because of the fear that her parents have. Our story also included our package included a story on students, interviewing students who were saying that they were being singled out for wearing the mask and how they were being discriminated against. And so our students got a chance to see what discrimination means in a different, I guess in a different milieu, if you will, that wearing these masks, what did it mean? And that they were targeted and somehow discriminated against at the University of Miami and in South Florida.
Yeah, it's a really great story for anyone who wants a chance to go check that out. I will share the link in the chat before we get off the call. I want to just take a moment to see if anyone has any questions. Russell, I know you were going to plan on stepping out. You're still hanging with us, which is great. Were you able to field any questions? Did you notice anything come through the room? Let me go ahead and unmute you. There we go.
Okay. What I was saying is so far people have compliments about what has been said on this conference. And let's see here. I don't see any questions as of yet, just compliments and comments. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat area here so we can.
Yeah. Okay, here we have a question from Janelle Forney. Is that someone you know, Terrell? you have the family doing shout outs here. In the era of fake news, has it affected the way you report your stories? We touched on that a little bit at the top. Terrell, it's a great opportunity for you to address it right now.
Yeah, the power is in a push. Jacqueline really addressed a lot of the good points of that earlier, but the power is in the push. I mean, if you really believe in the power of journalism, if you really believe in what you do every day, especially with covering such a vast story, really a story that affects everyone directly and indirectly, I think it just empowers you to keep pressing forward. So it only encourages you to push stronger and, you know, continue doing what you're doing. I don't see it as slowing down at all.
Yeah. Thank you for that. If anyone else has a question, go ahead and drop it in. I'm going to shoot this last question over to Jacqueline and Terrell. Then that's exactly what it's going to. So Jefferson, thank you for asking that question. You know, for students and young journalists just starting out in the careers, it's not an easy road. It can be discouraging. Journalism, forget coronavirus, but journalism can be even discouraging on the best days. It's not an easy field. But do you have any words of encouragement? Terrell, we'll start with you. Do you have any words of encouragement for those journalists? And even when you're dealing with a tough time, is there a story or a moment that you go back to that keeps you going and pushing through some of those harder, darker days of journalism, especially now?
Yeah, for me, you know, looking back at, you know, individual stories that I've covered, I mean, you get so involved in your day-to-day and running from one interview to the next interview, going from story to story, that it's hard to really grasp the impact of what you do. And every now and then there's somebody who, you know, comes up to you or emails you about a story and lets you know just on the impact that you did. So I won't say that there's been a specific incident, but just every now and then there's that reminder that what we do is so important. And in just marching forward in this world of journalism, it's going to get incredibly complex in this year. There are newspapers, there are TV stations, many that are losing out on the ad revenue, how we make our money, because a lot of the companies that are affected by this stay-at-home order and this pandemic, they are canceling their contracts. So it's going to get rough. But you really have to still prove yourself and your work. Don't wait for people to come to you. You've got to come to them. I mean, this business is incredibly important. It will continue to be incredibly important, and it will come back. So you can't be, you know, thinking that it's not, because it is.
Yeah. Jacqueline, I want you to go ahead and answer that same question. How do you stay encouraged? What advice would you have for young journalists at this moment?
You got to have anchors in your life. You know, I have friends who don't read the paper, or they tell me about a story that I covered or I wrote. Then there are people who, they know your work, they know your worth, they understand why you do what you do. And in those moments where you're being attacked or being talked about, because sometimes people forget that we're human and that we're reporters, so we become the scapegoats. And I deal with this a lot. You got to have those anchors in your life that remind you of why you do what you do and why you're doing it. There's a saying that I say all the time, and one of my friends who's a editor here, Nancy San Martin, who's in charge of Global Herald, she's like, you know, you got to stop using that phrase, but it's so true. It's about giving voice to the voiceless. I mean, that's why I write these stories. It's not about making friends. It's not about making politicians comfortable or happy. You know, it comes out of your mouth and then it comes out into a story. Maybe you don't like the way that story is being framed and you don't like the headline, but did you not say it? Is this not the message that is being relayed to people? And then for young journalists, I mean, look, this business is changing, but it's not dead. You have to be ready to go with the change. When I graduated from Chapel Hill, you know, I was just a print. Today I'm print, I'm video, I'm social media, you know, you do it all. I mean, you have to be able to do it all and you have to be versatile. But at the end of the day, you have to have those basic skills, which I know Cece will agree with me. You have to know how to write, you have to know how to report and how to research. That's what it's about. That's what journalism is about.
And it kind of touches on, thank you for that. Cam J just dropped in a question. It's very relevant to what you're saying now about experience and knowing how to do the work. So I want to give an opportunity to have this answered. How do you weave out of various cases and stories, and how do you find which is more important to report?
Oh my God. So I deal with this every day. I mean, since this pandemic, I've been literally reporting 2, sometimes 3 stories a day. And so every day it's a balance in terms of which story do you tell, which stories impact. So I cover like 24 countries, you know, in the Caribbean. So one of the things that I've tried to do is to look for trends, regional stories, something that's happening in Jamaica, but it may be happening also in Puerto Rico. It may be happening in El Salvador and Central America. I mean, that's what I try to do, to bring as many readers around a story and use this as a teaching moment also for people to understand that while we may be acting like we are in this for ourselves, every man, woman, and child for him or herself, that the reality is that this has to be a regional approach. It has to be a global approach. So that's one of the things that I use for stories, is how do you elevate the story to elevate the conversation? And look for the human element, you know, stories about important. We did a story about fake news, and we did it from the perspective of Ecuador and what was happening there. You know, they've got a lot of bodies on the streets because one of the cities is just being overwhelmed by the virus. But we also brought in examples from other places. You know, at some point too, as we get more and more into the victims, you know, there will be stories you will start to see about putting a face and a name on somebody, you know, sort of obits in the time of COVID-19. Terrell did that, you know, with his piece, so that people understand that this wasn't just a statistic. This was an individual who meant a lot to people, and this can be your father, your grandfather. So that's what we do. And then it's always about advancing the conversation. You know, every time you pitch a story to an editor, the editor is going to ask you, what's different than the last time you wrote about the economy, or what's different than the last time you wrote about slow testing issues? How does this advance the story, advance the debate, advance the conversation? So that's what you're always looking for as a journalist. And those are the things that we decide. I mean, sometimes you're going to get it right, sometimes you're not. Sometimes, you know, people are interested and they are. And you know, again, we don't really know what the readers are looking for a lot of times because they're so finicky in their news. But you go with your judgment.
Okay, Jacqueline, thank you so much. I want to thank all the panelists for being here today. Jacqueline Terrell, Cece Consuelo. Thank you for being here and showing up on your Saturday afternoon. We know it's very busy for all of you guys. I also want to throw it back to nabj South Florida VP. Actually, I'm not throwing it back to him. He's just jumping on right now. It's the first time we're hearing from him for the day, but he's been here with us. This is for going to Joanne Strader for some final remarks. Hey, Joanne.
Hey, Rochelle, how are you doing? You guys did a great job. Rochelle, great job as far as moderating, you know, with this new technology with Zoom. Terrell, Consuelo, thank you guys. Jacqueline, my girl, great job. CC, you know, just great information for so many of us out there that need this at this particular time. And Russell, thank you so much, man, for your leadership and one of my little brothers there, Jeff Noel, were, you know, helping to put this all together. I'm hoping that so many of you out there that are listening, that are watching this, that you got something out of this, because at this time we need guidance, we need mental health, we need to stick together as a group, as a team, to help get through this tough time. We don't know how much longer we're going to be going through this. We could be going through this for another 4 or 5 months, maybe even longer. And we know not until we get a vaccine, things will not be the same. We're going to be going through this for some time, but we want to let those journalists know out there that we are all here for you. And we are either here with ideas, we're here to help you find a job, we're going to be here to support you whatever way we can. That's what our organization is all about. So again, we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Again, I'm hunkered down at my home here with the kids, the wife, the family, and everybody else. But just like many of you out there, you know, I'm trying to make it day by day. But this was encouraging, and I feel so much better just seeing all your faces. And I think Russell's trying to talk, but he's muted. Somebody needs to unmute Russell. There he is. Oh, he just muted again. You're still muted, Russell. I got you, Russell.
Russell, you want to talk?
All right. Thanks a lot, Jawan. And I just want to thank everybody for spending this hour with us. I hope it was very informational, and I hope it was life-changing, because as we know, COVID-19 isn't going anywhere anytime soon. We have no idea. So we need to stay connected and we need to stay informed. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Russell.
Well done.
Way to go, Terrell.